Welcome everyone to Coffee with a Codex. My name is Dot Porter. I'm a curator in the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies in the Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books and Manuscripts in the University of Pennsylvania Libraries. Coffee with a Codex is our weekly program. It's a little show and tell where we pull a manuscript off the shelf and talk about it for about 30 minutes. Today, I'm very pleased to be in the CAT Center. I always call it the CAT Center. I think it has a more formal name, the Center Advanced Judaic Studies, which is in Center City, Philadelphia. So that's pretty neat off campus. And I'm here with Louis Meiselman, who is our Judaica Special Collections cataloger. He recently cataloged this manuscript, and he is going to tell us about it. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Louis. The microphone is attached to the computer, so you're going to need to speak up so they can hear you.
Thank you, Dot. As always, it's a privilege to be on the Coffee with the Codex. I always enjoy doing these, and I think that today's manuscript is an especially enjoyable one. I was especially excited to present on this manuscript, which I recently cataloged. You don't normally hear that an entire medieval codex manuscript is uncatalogued, but actually this one was uncatalogued. And the reason why is unclear, but our other medieval codex manuscript, which is worth seeing a presentation by Elizabeth Hollander of the Ashkenazic Machzor from the Rhineland. That one was most likely purchased at the same time as this manuscript, yet this one was omitted from the report. More of those details you can see on the catalog record on the provenance of this manuscript and how it came to its former owner, Dropsy College here in Philadelphia, and which eventually made its way into the library at the CAT Center. So let's zoom out again and talk about what this is. So the work we have in front of us is called Sefer Shorashim. Sefer Shorashim literally means the book of root words, or the book of grammar in a more descriptive way to translate that. That originated as the second part of this author, David Kimchi, or known to many people as Radak, as an acronym, Rabbeinu David Kimchi. That was the second part of his work. Then the main work was called Sefer Michlol. And before I talk about him, I just want to mention that today we tend to think of works like dictionaries, lexicography, other works like that as more of reference tools, kind of assisting research maybe. That sort of idea. That I feel that is more of a modern way of looking at these works. A work like this one, Sefer Shorashim, was in the Middle Ages seen as sacred literature. Rabbinic literature. It was a great work of rabbinic literature, and it was actually seen as sacred despite maybe a more scientific approach that the author takes, or an author of a dictionary or a lexicography will take on developing a science of root words and a comparison of concepts and words. So I just felt that it was important to point that out in the beginning, because I know that there are people in our audience today who have a large knowledge of the work and where the work has developed in the Middle Ages, and they might know that this specific work is actually appended to many medieval Bibles, including famously the Kennicott Bible. And it was appended to a Bible, being that it was a sacred work and it was supposed to maybe abut the biblical work. More details probably are beyond the scope of what we're doing here, but I just felt that it's important to point out that these these lexicographies and other early ones such as Sefer HaAruch or Machberet Menachem, these were also sacred literature in the Middle Ages. So the author was from southern France, lived in southern France, from Narbonne, and there is evidence in our manuscript that this manuscript was also in southern France. Now, opening this manuscript, we have, first of all, we have a fragment of one leaf. That comes from the letter Bet, the second letter in the alphabet. And then the text continues all the way on the letter Tet, which is further down. So it is missing some of the gatherings in the front of the manuscript, unfortunately. I'm sure you could also see that there is some water damage, which you could see has actually blotted out the ink. We have also, I saved it into here, a piece of a leaf which is completely erased, and
You're gonna need to hold it a little further up. There you go.
And that has been completely waterlogged. This used to actually have text just like that on this piece, completely missing now, unfortunately, which occurs with manuscripts that, let's say, travel or are subject to different pieces of the elements that they can get partially or totally destroyed.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
And this is sort of a leading question because I know you're getting to it. But I'm noticing that this is paper. This is clearly paper.
Yes.
Here, but the first leaf here is parchment.
Yes.
So what's going on? Why is there both paper and parchment?
Yes. So that is something that was noticed before me by somebody writing on this binding. But in the 13th century part of this manuscript, which I will talk about, I'll get to the three different parts of this codex. In the 13th century part and part of the later part, the gatherings of this manuscript are chiefly made out of paper, but the outer folio, which would wrap the gathering, was made out of parchment. So the first and last actual folio, what we see here after it's been cut and bound, are in parchment. And if you take a look at the catalog record, this is in the collation field if you want to see more of the details. The way that they did this is not completely unique, if I'm not mistaken.
It's not unique, no.
This
I've seen
was-
it before in other manuscripts.
Yes,
Yeah.
so this is not like like a great rare discovery, but it still does make for some interesting page turning. So if you take a look at the other side, you could see the difference where the manuscript continues from this word onto this word, but I'm not sure how clear this is in the video, that this is on parchment and this is on paper. And that is the same throughout the manuscript. For example, over here, these two folios are on parchment. The reason why is because this folio is the end of this gathering, this folio is the beginning of the other gathering, and in the original element of this manuscript, all the gatherings begin and end in parchment because the gatherings were wrapped in parchment. Now, okay, we're, as I mentioned, we're still in the 13th century portion of this manuscript. The author is said to have died circa 1235. I don't believe that we know exactly the year he died, but that's the circa date. That makes this portion of this manuscript one of the earliest copies of this work to survive. And it was a very popular work, it was copied a lot. But this is one of the oldest ones, which is also something that's important to point out about this manuscript. Some of you may recognize this script. I want to say something about the script of this, this is the Sephardic semi-cursive script or cursive. This was eventually to become the most popular typeface of General Hebrew. Some know it as the Rashi script, although that its association with Rashi does not really have a true source. That's for another time. But what you're looking at here is a specimen of a 13th century Sephardic script, which later was to become in different variations almost universal in type.
Mm-hmm. Do you mind if I zoom in a little bit?
Of course.
So we can get a better. Here we go. We can also see that I've been eyeing these marginal notes or glosses.
Yes.
What's happening in the margin?
Marginalia. The marginalia is only on this oldest part of the manuscript, and if you look in the marginalia, which I believe was written after the main manuscript was written.
Yeah, there's a question about them being in another hand.
Yeah, I believe that is in another hand, and what they are is it's telling you where in the Bible the author is quoting something, and there's all kinds of quotes of different variations of words in the text, and the author, as you could see from these handwritten marginalia, the sources and citations, how many of these verses they're quoting. Another thing you can see from these citations is that whoever wrote them knew his Bible, because he only writes the book that the verse is from. For example,
he doesn't need the chapter and the verse because he just knows. That's great.
And it actually, I think it makes it a little bit more aesthetic because you don't see all these dots and numbers and all that. But for example, that's the book of Zephaniah. That is the book of Yeshaya or Isaiah. When it comes to the Pentateuch, so he writes what's called the Sedra, which is the division of the Torah portion as relating to the synagogue reading. So here, for example, Vayigash, Vayechi, those are portions of Genesis at the end of Genesis. So that's the style of these marginalia, these annotations, which are citations. Later in the printed version of this work, we actually have true citations. I don't think that these would be considered to be true citations because it just says which book it is.
Yeah, it's more like notes to himself.
Right.
Yeah.
There's some cross-outs here. This manuscript, as in many early manuscripts of many different works, have a lot of variations to printed editions. We have to keep in mind that printed editions, especially early printed editions, would use one or possibly two manuscripts of the work to create the printed edition. But there would be an entire array of manuscripts of a work, especially a work like this, and that's how we get variants. And and later on, when they started producing academic editions, they would show variants of words or statements in a work. And you could see something like that in here, where somebody later crossed out a line that he felt maybe was not reflected in a printed edition or not reflected in another manuscript of it.
Mm-hmm. So there's a question I'm going to ask you at the end. There is a question about what are the enlarged characters, so the larger characters there.
Yes. The enlarged characters are each new word, so it's an entry. Each entry goes by word. So for example, Yelech, Yelef, Yelek, Yam. These are alphabetical, and they're selected by the author. They don't follow a pre-prescribed selection of words, but they wanted to be able to, if you were to use this manuscript to look up a certain word, you would have to look up the word, and you would have to follow the alphabetical order. The purpose of this work is not to study the text of the Bible by looking up a verse in the Bible. You would actually study the word, and then you would see his biblical examples of that word.
Right.
And I think a lot of medieval lexicography follows that pattern.
There's a question from Talia that I think I'll answer, which is about the lack of catchwords. So if we go back to the two parchment, here we go. Often when when manuscripts were made and then bound, there would be a catchword at the end of one quire that basically is a word that matches the first word at the start of the next quire that can be helpful for when you're doing the binding and putting them together to make sure they're in the right order. And she asks, she doesn't see that. Is this surprising? I don't think it's surprising. I think some manuscripts have them and some don't. So it's not really, it's nice when they're there. I think it's really cool when they're there, but sometimes they're not, and that's not really surprising.
Yeah, one thing to add to that also is that there is evidence of this, the edges of this manuscript being cut down at some kind of later point, which unfortunately did happen. There were many centuries between the creation of this item and us today, so a lot has happened in that time. And it could be that some of them were cut off, but it also could be that they never were created.
Yeah.
That has to do with how it might have been composed.
Yeah. So I'm just going to point out we are at 18 minutes.
Oh, okay.
So you might want to, we're still in the 13th century, so
yes,
we're going to keep going.
This manuscript, like I mentioned, also has different parts to it. Just quickly on this end of the 13th century portion, I think these folios at the end of it, you see the actual, something a little bit closer to the original color of the ink, which is a very dark and deep hue. And you can see the damage that water, dust, and possibly other things like sunlight has done to the beginning. The paper has dried out, but the parchment has really started to crimp, to...
This is parchment here, right?
Yes,
yeah.
And you could see how that has started to really wrinkle.
Yeah.
And you could see there's possibly some dead mold on this.
Nice.
I've put this forth as a candidate for conservation. I hope it goes through.
What is this?
That is a piece of binding waste that
cool.
I wrote about here.
I've never seen this manuscript before. This is all new to me. I love it.
Yes. Okay.
Oops, sorry.
That is a piece of the Talmud that is about a century earlier than this manuscript, between 60 to 100 years earlier. Based upon the script, we have a small piece of the of a manuscript of the Talmud, and that was, of course, something nice that came up in the manuscript itself. Okay. Now,
Ooh.
Look at that. That is where the script almost immediately changes.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you could see that it's a dramatic change. What you can see is that while this is parchment and this is paper, the leaf count inside each quire changes because it's not as old, and the parchment is thinner and likely more modern, a little bit.
So how many quire? We didn't talk about the number of leaves in the quire. How many leaves do we go from to? I think it was 4. I think there was one that had 14.
Yes. The earliest quires have 16 leaves in this manuscript.
And then we have 8.
And yeah, then the center portion has some 8 quires of 8.
Right. Okay.
And also, like I said, you can't see it, but the paper and the parchment is more modern and does not look like it has been subject to the same kind of abuse as the earlier portion.
So when you say more modern, you're talking like how much more modern?
Like mid to late 14th century.
So still, 14th century. So still really old.
Yeah, we're at the end of the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
But in regards to Talia, there is a catchword on this center part because this is a later part of the manuscript.
Right.
And you could see also, but the main change is the script. This script is the Sephardic script, but this is a very heavily French influenced Sephardic script, and possibly with some Italian influence. And I believe that this part, based upon the end of the manuscript, where I'm going to show you another change in the script, likely the second part of this manuscript was written either in some part of France or in Italy, but definitely with an Italian influence. And let's continue on to there. As you could see, the script continues in this very beautiful scribal script with these different catchwords and variations here. Here you could see the styles of the square script that we see as the entry. And here's some of the decorative, more calligraphic title lettering to say we have completed the letter Samach. Now we will begin the letter Ayin. And now I'm about to show you some of this later script. That looks even later to me, but that is almost certainly an Italian hand. This is closer to an Italian, even square script, or maybe an Italian semi-cursive. But I would say that this part of the writing may have occurred on earlier paper, but this writing looks almost to me like 15th century already. So the different parts of the writing in this manuscript have been evolving and going over different locales of writing.
Yeah. So I have a question about that, the fact that it's in these 3 sections. Does that mean that somebody wrote a complete manuscript in the 13th century and then they replaced part of it later on? Is that what you're thinking? Or do you think it was partially, I guess there's not really a way to tell, but what is your sense of that? Like, how did it get together like this?
There isn't a definitive way, at least as I see it, as a way to tell, although I would love for somebody to look at this manuscript and tell me that there is a way to answer some of these questions. But I will point out that unfortunately, the last 4 leaves of the final 13th century portion of the manuscript, so again, in that final quire, those last 4 leaves are missing. So it could have been that it just abruptly stopped. It could have been that we had the manuscript to completion, which is what I would hope had been true. And we don't know. There's also missing, like I said in the beginning, and we have one fragment of a leaf from the second letter, even though it starts later.
Right.
Here's a little...
yeah, it's like a little scar in the parchment.
I have to move this.
Yeah. It's somebody asked about the binding. The binding that we have is 20th century, right? It's 19th or 20th century?
Yeah, I would say even the 20th century.
Yeah, it's a lot later.
Purchased from a rare book dealer circa, let me just get the exact time. Oh, okay. Probably about 1944 to 1945, purchased from a dealer named Felix Kaufman in New York.
Right. So, but the manuscript was compiled before then. It was just at some point the binding had to be replaced.
That's right. Yeah.
And it should be replaced again. Frankly, it's not very good.
Yes. This, as you could see by me having to shift these as I turn them, this binding gives almost no support to this manuscript. At the end of this manuscript, the parchment stops, and then we only have gatherings of this paper.
Right.
This,
that's
like
nice
I said,
looking paper.
Yes, it's good paper, probably Italian, and like I said, so this script is about 15th century Italian, and some of the ink is oxidizing, which you don't see earlier, probably because of the variations of ink that they were using at that time.
Yeah. So when Louis says the ink is oxidizing, you can see the sort of dark, how it's sort of dark and splotchy. That's the it's basically the iron in the ink is eating away at the paper, and so that's what that looks like.
Yes. And as you can see, I'm just going through the ends of this manuscript, and it is all paper at this point. And lucky for us, this manuscript, this later part of the manuscript continues until the completion of the work.
So it goes all the way to the end.
Yes.
Excellent.
And we're in the letter Shin.
So what is happening? What is that? What kind of damage is that? Do you know?
So maybe,
Oh, and it's on the bottom too.
I don't know exactly what caused that. I'd be interested to hear, possibly, maybe Amy knows.
Someone in the chat is suggesting mice nibbles, which is honestly what I thought as well, that it looks like something's been nibbling it, but I don't know.
Right, but I would think that a mouse would nibble in a deeper, more with a deeper
Maybe.
perforation.
I wonder if it was, is it just this? Maybe this section was separate, not knowing how the collation is. If that's a separate choir, maybe it was
No, I believe that goes over a few choirs. But if I had to guess, based upon what I've seen in these kind of situations,
Mhm.
water got into the edges, and
Ah.
somebody turned the
Oh,
pages and tore out
tore
a whole
out.
section of the
Yeah.
manuscript. For example, there are some manuscripts that you see have been turned so many thousands of times, each folio, that the thumbs have created
Yeah.
openings like that look like that. That looks
Yeah.
like an indenture.
Okay.
So if, again, like, it's all guess,
Mhm.
but
Yeah. So there are a couple of questions I want to be sure to get to. One, Talia is asking if there's a colophon at the end of the root words in the letter none. Do you know?
well, we can look. I don't believe I
is that-
saw one when I cataloged it.
Okay. Yes, this hasn't been digitized, right?
Nope.
But it will be
it
this
definitely
summer,
will
I
be.
think. So, so usually they're already digitized, but this time,
So Talia,
this time next year.
the letter known is in the beginning of what I called the 14th century portion. As you can see, I'm turning, and it does not look to me that there is any kind of colophon here.
Sir, wait, can you go back one page, Louis? Yeah, okay, so Yona Katav, do you see?
Yes.
Arba otiot, Habeur, maybe, Yona Katav, I don't know, Hanashton.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm reading it right. Is that the name of Jonah?
It could
Or
be.
is it something else?
It could be. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I will look this up.
Yeah, no, it would be
usually
interesting
when
to compare. It'd be interesting to compare it to the kind of summarizing large letters that appear after all the other letters of the alphabet.
right.
Okay.
Usually when Yona's quoted all over the work, it's Yona ibn Janach.
Got it.
That's
That makes
probably
total
why
sense.
I just turned through that and did not make note of it.
And that means that it would not be a colophon. That means that it's a citation from an earlier lexicographic work. Thank you.
Thank you. I still want to look into that.
Yeah, okay.
all right. And there was one more question that Talia had earlier that I was waiting till the end, and
Okay.
we are almost out of time. What is your evidence that this and other lexicographic works were regarded as sacred?
Well, there's a number of evidences based upon the way it was quoted and cited in contemporary and later literature. But I think that probably the strongest source that we can talk about today, based upon evidence of manuscripts, is how it was written and bound into Bibles, and it was printed. It was printed fairly concurrently, I believe, with the first Bomberg editions of the Rabbinic Bible too.
Yeah.
For example, what I meant by that also is maybe we see librarians catalog, like we're catalogers. We put things in the section, let's say Z or the reference, and they're looked on as like a separate sort of subject than the Bible, which is in a whole nother subject. But then it was more of it was sacred literature, and maybe even seen by some as a little bit closer to a biblical commentary. It could be cited in line, for example, with Ramban and his commentary on the Torah, and then you would cite Radak. Well, where are you citing Radak? Well, maybe you could definitely see citations of Radak in Sharashim and Michlol. So
Okay, so I have my doubts, and I'm not sure that Bible commentaries were considered sacred.
okay. Well, it's all I meant was, like, for example, if you take like the medieval codices and the fact that they would write into them this Sharashim or in the entire Michlol,
Right.
might show us some of that.
Yeah.
Well, there's much more in there too, like lists of kings of Judah and Israel. I think there's another explanation for the inclusion, but.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we are at time. So thank you everyone for coming. Thanks, Talia, for your great questions, and everyone
Oh,
else
thank
for
you. Yes.
contributing. So yeah, so we'll be back next week. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Louis, so much for sharing this with us. It's a great manuscript. Hopefully we can get it into preservation and conservation, and we can get a new binding.
Yes,
And
I hope so, too.
I hope so. And Louis will definitely be back in a few months. In fact, we already know what he's going to be talking about, so watch for that. And we'll be back next week. And have a great week, everyone. It's always good to see you. Thank you.